Now let's have a look at a next hook, useContext hook. Imagine there are multiple levels of components and you need to share the data like user authentication information or any theme settings without passing your props through each level. In this case, useContext allows any component to access the shared data directly. Let's take a look at the usage. The purpose of useContext hook is to allow components to access and use values from React's context without having to pass props down manually through each level of the component tree. It simplifies the process of sharing data such as themes, user information, or any other global settings between deeply nested components. There are some key benefits of using this hook. It avoids prop drilling. You don't need to pass the props through multiple levels of components. You are able to access the global data. Components can directly use shared context data. Let's try to have a look at how it was without using the useContext hook. Imagine there's a hierarchy. You have total 4 components, a provider, which is at the topmost component, then component A, component B, and then component C. So right now only component C is required to use the data. So in this case, the data needs to be passed manually from the provider through each component until it reaches component C. This process is called as prop drilling. Let's now see what happens if we use the useContext hook. We again have the same components, but this time component C can directly access the data from the provider, skipping intermediate components. This eliminates the need for prop drilling. Let's now simulate the useContext hook. So we will now create a component A.js. Also create another component B. So we are going to consider total 3 components in the hierarchy. So our first component will be app.js. Second component in the hierarchy is component A, and the third component is component B. So let's have a function inside these, RAFCE. Function is created. Now inside app.js, comment out your complete code. Once again, we are going to create our function. Now inside this, we are going to import our component A. Import component A from components/component A. And inside this, we will be rendering our component. So this is our component A. Let's come to component A now. Now inside the component A, we need to import component B and render component B. Now what our motive is, we will now send the data directly from app to component B, skipping component A in between. So let's write on the code in app.js. We will first of all be required to create context. Const user context equals to react.create context. Next, we are going to create another context. Let's say score context equals to react dot create context. We are considering an example where we will pass the user data and the score of the user down to the component B. So we created two variables as user context and score context. We created the context using create context function. Now what exactly this function does? This is used to create a context object that allows you to share values such as data or functions between the components without passing props through every level in the component tree. So now we need a provider that is associated with this create context. Now inside the div tag, you will be creating the user context provider dot provider, pass the value inside the JSX, let's say Amisha. And further, we need another provider for the score context dot provider. Within this, you have to render your component A. So I'll be removing the component A from here. Also pass the value for the score. Let's say it's 45. Now we have to use these two contexts that we just created, user context and score context, inside component B, skipping component A in between. And that's where the beauty of useContext lies. So first of all, we are now required to export these two variables. Proceeding to component B, you need to import useContext hook. Also import the two contexts that you just created. Import user context and score context from app. After this, you need to create two variables as, let's say, user. Now we have to use the useContext hook. The useContext hook accepts the parameter as the context that you have created. User context is the first one, then const score is the second one. Use context and pass the parameter score context. Now how to render? For rendering, we need to use JSX user, let's say I'm using hyphen, and score. Let's check the browser. We got the result as Amisha 45. Let's consider another example where we need to switch the theme between light and dark. So we are going to create another component with the name theme switch.js. Right, so we will be now first of all importing the use context hook, and we also need the use state hook because we will now be required to have two themes, that is light and dark. So create the theme context react.create context. Also set the initial state to a light theme. So first item will be the original theme. Second one is the function that will change the theme. Use state and pass the value as light. And within the return statement, you need to create a provider, theme context dot provider. All right, and within this we have to now render another component. So it's up to you if you want to create a separate component or you want to create a function here itself. Let's say I'm creating another function here. Const, I'm taking another function that is themed component. Now within this, I'm going to use this context, that is the theme context. We need to use an object wherein I'm passing theme and set theme. Use context, theme context, and return. You need to return the div tag. Specify a paragraph indicating the current theme. So I write here current theme as, that is the initial state, that is theme. We also need a button to change the theme. Use the event handler. On click, mention the text toggle theme. Now before we use the function set theme here, before that we need to use the style attribute. You can either use a separate style file or you can use it directly here as an inline style. Now within this we are going to specify an object. Background color. So for this property I'll be using the theme as the initial state. So I'm going to use a ternary operator. Whenever the theme is light, means whenever this condition is true, it should switch to black. And second is that for this text current theme, when the background theme changes to black, the text color should be opposite, means the text color should be white and vice versa. So I'm going to specify color where the theme should be, if it's light, then it has to be white, or else it has to be black. Also, you are required to now render your themed component here. So a component has been rendered. You also need to mention the value attribute. Inside the JSX, specify the object theme, comma, set theme, because now this time we have two values, that is theme, the initial value, and set theme, the function that will change the value. Alright, now let's come to this event handler. Use the set theme function and specify that if your theme is light, then it should turn to dark or if it's not light, then it should turn to light. Now finally we can export our theme component. We are creating another component inside the same component. So I'm going to render my theme provider. Theme switch. So I write here theme switch. Export your theme function, export default theme. Remove the default export from here, and inside app.js we already have imported our theme component and rendered it. So let's check the result on the browser. So the current theme showing is light, but actually it's dark. Anyhow, it works well in terms of styling, but the text is not correct. So let's rectify. We need to change here to white, and black means if it's light, we are actually using the background color such that if it's light, then it should be white, or else it should be black, while the color theme should be opposite. That is the text color. This has to be black and this has to be white. So now the current theme is light, which is correct. When you toggle the theme, you get a dark theme and the text is also correct. This was a pretty simple and interesting example. See you in the next video with the next kind of hook.